the central coast of California, an area of rugged beauty, pounding surf, protected bays, and relatively warm offshore waters. A creature lives here amid canopies of kelp, a creature that once was hunted by man almost to extinction. But today it enjoys man's protection and is now thriving and growing in numbers. This is the playful, intelligent, and active mammal biologists call Enhydra lutris, better known as the sea otter. The sea otter's story of survival is an old one. It stretches back millions of years in time. At one time, up to 300,000 otters lived along the North American coastline. But an all-out fur trade last century reduced their numbers to a few remnant populations. One of these, 50 to 100 animals, was found near California's Point Sur around 1920. But the sea otter is a resourceful and intelligent animal, and above all, vigorous. And by 1977, 2,000 of them again lived in a range that extended from Santa Cruz to Avila, a distance of about 180 miles. Sea otters spend almost all their lives in the water. They even mate and give birth at sea. A female can have a pup every 2 years. Their pregnancy is thought to be 8 or 9 months, and the mother cares for her pup for almost a year after it is born. They have no major animal enemies, except for occasional attacks by white sharks. Off Amchitka, Alaska, bald eagles have been known to take pups when their mothers are diving for food. In most of the California range, otters stay by themselves or in small groups of 2 to 6. Once in a while, though, they collect in larger groups, or rafts, of up to 150 animals. The present population between Monterey and Morro Bay averages about 13 animals per square mile. As the total population grows, the young and vigorous expand the range in their search for food. Otters prefer abalones and sea urchins. In fact, these creatures account for most of their food when they first move into new range. They round out their diet with crabs, clams, snails, mussels, scallops, chitons, barnacles, starfish, and even octopus and squid. The otter searches for his food over a wide area and may dive up to 300 feet deep, although most dives are made in less than 100 feet. Average dives last from 1 to 2 minutes, but an otter can stay under for up to 4 minutes before it has to come up for air. In order to break shells or dislodge its prey, it often uses rocks or some other hard objects as a tool. It is one of the few animals known to use such tools on a regular basis. Then it goes to the surface to eat. And when it gets there, it uses its tummy for a dining table. When it eats clams, it opens one clam with another. Sea otters must eat a large amount of food every day to survive. The average otter eats about 25% of its own weight every day, close to 2 tons a year. In fact, food is the primary limiting factor for otters. If they don't eat, they can lose up to 10% of their weight every day and could die in 3 days. This is because otters have to generate their own 100-degree body heat to stay warm, and that takes a lot of food. Not all their time is spent in active pursuits. Otters spend some of it resting or sleeping. They often place kelp over their bodies to keep from being carried away by wind or current. At rest, on the surface, sea otters float with their paws out of the water to reduce heat loss. Then there is the fur. Its unique quality keeps the warmth in. Otters don't have the fat layer that other marine animals have. This fantastic fur holds an air layer that increases the insulation, and the otter works in more air by somersaulting and working bubbles into his fur with his paws. Dr. Victor Moorjohn has carefully studied sea otters. Here he describes the unique quality of the fur.
This fur consists of a series of underhair fibers and long guard hairs that you see here in the close-up section of skin. It is this layer here of underhairs that entraps the air bubbles and provides the insulating barrier necessary to keep the animal warm and thermoregulate in the water.
Anything that soils or mats this fur, such as food particles or even oil, can allow water to get to the skin. At this point, the otter can contract pneumonia and die. So while he eats, the otter grooms his fur and rolls in the water to wash out the food particles and to maintain the insulating quality of the fur. Because of what oil can do to the fur, there is concern that a major oil spill within the otter range would be a serious threat to the sea otter population off California. Ancestral forms of today's fish, invertebrates, and plants were evolving along these shores long before sea otters or man appeared. In prehistoric times, there were kelp forests in much of California's near-shore area, and they provided food, habitat, and protective cover for many species of life. Larger forms of life cruised through the kelp forests in search of food. Ancient types of abalone, sea urchin, mussels, clams, and crabs were abundant. They inhabited the shallow waters and lay exposed along the seabed. These communities of life were probably similar to those found today in some of the more inaccessible waters off northern and southern California. It's believed the ancestor of today's sea otter appeared along the shore of the Pacific about 5 million years ago. According to this theory, these otters originally came from the lakes and rivers of Asia. They slowly moved eastward over the years and finally evolved into an ocean-dwelling creature. As it adapted to the sea, it enlarged its habitat. In time, these animals could be found all along the North Pacific shore, from Japan to Baja California. They expanded their range wherever they found enough food and adequate habitat. Even then, they mostly ate abalone, crab, clams, and sea urchins. The first Aboriginal people appeared in North America about 100,000 years ago. After a time, their list of prey included not only fish and creatures they could pick up along the shore, but seals, whales, and sea otters. There was a time, about 2,000 years ago, that otters were seldom seen in parts of northern Alaska because of the hunting skills of the Aleuts. In California, coastal Indians also took otters for food and fur. And like the otters, Indians developed a taste for shellfish, as their campsites reveal. Sea otter pelts were status symbols for Northern California Indians and were worn by tribal leaders. In 1741, Vitus Bering became the first European to discover sea otters off Kamchatka Peninsula, and a serious fur trade was begun. When British explorer James Cook confirmed rumors of large numbers of sea otters along the Pacific coastline of North America, fur trading there began in earnest. And fur traders from many nations sailed for the living riches of the Pacific coast. The Russians were the best known of the sea otter fur traders. They and their Aleutian hunters moved steadily down the coast, built Fort Ross in 1812, and used it as a base of operations. During a period of 75 years, they took an estimated 750,000 skins from the North American coast. The Aleuts hunted the otters with spears, but their takes were modest when compared to the slaughter after 1830, when gunfire took over for spears. From that point, otter populations rapidly decreased, and by the early 1900s, sea otters were rarely found off California. Then, in 1911, an international treaty was signed to protect fur seals and otters on the high seas. In 1913, the otter became fully protected off the Aleutian Islands, while at the same time the state of California passed a law to protect the sea otter. By this time, the sea otter was in danger of becoming extinct. There were only 12 small groups left off North America, and the world population was thought to be down to probably less than 2,000 animals. South of Alaska, only 3 small groups remained, at the Queen Charlotte Islands in British Columbia, San Benitos Islands in Baja California, and at Point Sur in California. By 1920, only the Point Sur group was left. With full legal protection afforded by the Acts of 1911 and 1913, the sea otter began to come back, slow but steady. When the international treaty was terminated in 1941, California established a sea otter refuge along its central coast. In 1944, the Federal Seal Act took effect, which prohibited the taking of sea otters on the high seas. In 1959, California enlarged the sea otter refuge. Possession of firearms was prohibited in the area. The otters off California responded by increasing in number and extending their range about 2.5 miles a year. When a number of otters reached the Monterey Bay area in the 1950s, the aesthetic value of the otter rapidly became apparent. This creature gave an added dimension to the already considerable attractions of the California coast. To the south, the territory extended to San Simeon in 1965 and to Morro Bay in 1972. That same year, the Federal Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed, transferring control of sea otters from states to the federal government. On the premise that a major oil spill off the coast could endanger the entire population, the sea otters off California were declared threatened in 1977 under authority of the Endangered Species Act. By then, the total sea otter population off North America had returned to a large portion of its original range. Off California, it is gradually reoccupying its ancient range. This recovery occurred in areas where there was plenty of available food and habitat. But things aren't the same as they were over 100 years ago. The otter has come back to find millions of people in California, and large numbers of them using increasingly large quantities of shellfish for recreational and commercial purposes. This has had an undetermined effect on its rate of expansion. The rich seaweed growth supplies food for a large variety of shellfish off California and an increasing harvest of kelp. This kind of marine life has always done well outside the otter areas and still does. But inside their range, foraging otters, because of their feeding habits, pick the sea bottom clean of most of the exposed abalone, clams, and urchins. By eating so many of the grazing invertebrates, otters may have effected an increase in seaweed. The ecological effect of this change is being studied, but one thing is sure: the sea otters use food that a certain sector of our growing human population has become accustomed to over the last 75 years. Since 1947, Pismo clams have been restricted to recreational catches because of the limited supply. The clam fishery within the otter range has been reduced to insignificant levels because of both man and otter. A good fishery still exists outside that range. Outside the sea otter's range in Northern California, recreational divers and shore pickers still take large numbers of abalone every year. The situation is different in Southern California because of the competition between the recreational and commercial users. Commercial abalone fishing is limited to areas outside the otter's range. The last commercial abalone beds in otter territory became unproductive and were abandoned in 1976. Commercial and recreation fishing for crabs has been good in recent years. Fishermen are concerned that these stocks may suffer should the sea otter extend its range. However, this is not certain and is a subject for further investigation. Mariculture techniques for other types of invertebrate species developed inside the sea otter range would require special techniques to protect them from sea otter foraging. Competition for food supplies is not new. In today's world, there are increasing conflicts between people and many animals. So, all interested parties agreed to a study of this animal and its place in today's marine environment, a study they hope will provide some solutions. Changes and accommodations have been made in the past, and they will be made in the future as well. But what will they be? As of 1977, that question remained to be answered.